5 years on 12 songs. This isn't the 80s anymore. That doesn't fly. That is the worst case scenario for perfection right there. In this episode, we're talking about the 3 things artists do to push themselves out of their comfort zones in order to grow. I always want to keep it 100% real with you guys. I'm not a big time producer. If Jack Antonoff or Mark Ronson were like the Lamborghinis, then I would be kind of a consumer Mercedes, or maybe even a used Lexus. But I am full time, and that's been my lifelong dream. And in my first year with the brick and mortar production house, I was just a few contracts away from making 6 figures. Gross, not net, remember, keeping it real. Now 6 figures in the San Francisco Bay Area means that instant ramen is never necessarily off of the menu. But the point is, even with where I am now, I've gotten to work with people who've sold millions of records and or copies and or streams. I've also worked with people who are mainstays in music for film and TV. And the one thing I've noticed in common with all of those people is that they're constantly trying to push themselves out of their comfort zone. Here's a list of 3 things they do to push themselves to keep themselves out of the comfort zone. Now these things are all kind of linked, so make sure to watch the whole thing, or maybe one thing won't make any sense with the others. Because here's the thing, you can never grow if you never leave your comfort zone. You've heard the 10,000 hour phrase, right? There's a saying that if you put 10,000 hours towards something, you become a badass at it. There's even a semi-current pop song about it, I think. But I think that's more geared towards love or whatever. You need to get started on those 10,000 hours. Maybe you've already put in like 500. But here's the trick. When you're working on those 10,000 hours, make sure you're spending as much time on the admin as you are on the fun stuff. It's easy to focus on things like writing, recording, and playing live. Those are fun, but you need to spend a lot of those 10,000 hours in marketing, admin, and planning as well. I get a lot of people in the studio who are working their asses off, but they're only working on the fun stuff. And that's going to result in a catastrophic failure if you're trying to do this as anything more than a hobby. Now, failure is what brings us to the next tip. So you're working on your 10,000 hours, and as long as you're focusing on both the admin and the fun stuff, the next step is to not be afraid of failing when putting those hours in. Catastrophic failure is one of those things where no matter how hard you're trying, it all comes crashing down. But most of the time, failure is just an opportunity to learn. It's super cheesy, but there's a phrase, you win some, you learn some. Now, super successful people, I've noticed, are awesome at failing because they learn from each failure to become better. They don't freak out and immediately change course if they fail. If they release a song and nobody likes it, they don't give up and take up knitting. No shade on people who knit, mind you, of course. It's just that successful people don't discourage that easily. Successful people don't give up easily. They learn what they can from failure and do it again. Now I get it, by avoiding the risk of failure, you avoid the heartbreak, you avoid the rejection. I think we've all been there as artists. But you've got to leave that comfort zone. Now, it's easier to have these small, non-catastrophic failures when you leave your comfort zone. But again, without leaving your comfort zone, you'll never grow. So while you're racking up those 10,000 hours, don't be afraid to fail and learn what you can from those failures. If you do that, I promise you those little failures will happen less and less frequently because you're becoming that badass we talked about. So get out there and fail. Now, this next one hurts my heart a little bit. We talked about being not afraid to fail, but what happens when you try too hard? You get perfectionism. A few years back, we produced some artists that were signed to a major label, and they had enough juice as rock stars so that they had a little bit of freedom as far as schedule goes when finishing the album. But they were serious perfectionists. No exaggeration, I had to leave the project after the album was going on 3 years after signing and it still wasn't done. And I was working on the album 2 years before they got signed. 5 years on 12 songs. This isn't the fucking 80s anymore. That shit doesn't fly. That is the worst case scenario for perfection right there. Now that deal opened up a lot of doors for me, but to my knowledge, that album is still not done and I'm pretty sure the label dropped him. Perfection is the enemy of done. And let's face it, perfection is kind of the manifestation of fear. Perfection is the creator trying their best to put their best foot forward. Now, I get wanting to put your best foot forward. Do your best for sure. But perfection is moving away from doing your best into a territory that's more like obsession and overthinking. Not to mention, perfection is a time suck. These days, if you're taking more than 2 or 3 months between original content releases, you'll lose current fans and bore the shit out of potential ones. And believe me, even if you didn't care and spent a year making one song, there's always someone out there who's still gonna think it sucks. So fuck perfection. Release consistently according to current market standards. If you're not feeling 100% on your last release, do better on the next one. This ties in again to leaving your comfort zone. In film, they say a project is never finished, it escapes. So let that shit escape. To avoid perfectionism, give yourself some deadlines and make the music the best it can be within those deadlines. That's not to say deadlines are never missed, but this is a goal to shoot for. Don't be like the artist who shall remain unnamed. Alright, these tips for kicking comfort zones to the curb should do wonders on your productivity. I still sometimes struggle with implementing some of what we talked about because we're human, but by keeping an eye towards these things as goals, it's made a huge difference in my workflow. And if you want to see the step-by-step workflow that we use in the studio when things aren't the way they are right now, click on the video that comes up. Thanks and much love to all of you who made it to the end. Please give a subscribe if you got any kind of value from this. We're a new channel and it really, really helps. We post every Friday, and until then, go write the next big hit.